You ever notice something about the Rocky Mountains? From a distance, right? You look at them and they just look peaceful, almost holy. They got snow on the peaks, there's wind moving through the timbers, you've got rivers cutting down through the valleys like silver wires. But if you start digging into the history of those mountains, you realize something pretty quickly. They're full of ghosts. Now, I'm not talking about the sheet-wearing kind here. No, I mean literally the ghosts of boomtowns, places that exploded into life for a few wild years, and then they just vanished like smoke once the gold ran out. Now, one of those places, it sat high in the mountains just west of present-day Vail, a mining camp called Holy Cross City. Now, that name, it sounds almost peaceful, right? Like a church town, like the kind of place where people might go to pray or start a quiet little settlement just up in the mountains. But the truth is, Holy Cross City, it was born the same way that most mining towns were. Gold fever. That's right. In the late 1870s, prospectors, they just started poking around the high basins near the Mount of the Holy Cross. And because of that, word spread that gold had been found in the creeks and veins running through the mountains up there. And, once that rumor started moving, well, the avalanche began. You see, the miners, they came in first, okay? Then it was the tents, and then the cabins, right? And then you had the saloons. Because wherever a mining camp appears, you had the full ecosystem of a boomtown that grew right behind it. So within a very short time, Holy Cross City had, a few couple hundred people living up there way in the high country, which doesn't sound like much today, right? But you have to imagine hauling every board, every stove, every sack of flour over rough mountain trails just to build a town at 9,000 feet up in the Colorado Rockies. Well, this wasn't easy living, okay? The winters up here, brutal. Snow just stacked up deep in the valley, and wind ripped down from the peaks. And the only thing keeping the town alive was the promise that somewhere under those mountains, gold was waiting. Now, the mines around Holy Cross City, they were never as rich as the camp's people dreamed about, right? No, that's an important part of this story, because mining towns that strike huge ore bodies, they tend to get organized really, really fast. You got the investors that come in, the equipment shows up, and then you have real money that stabilizes things. But when you have a district that is almost rich, when the ore is just good enough to keep people hopeful, but it's not good enough to make them comfortable, well, that's when tension starts to build. And tension was building in Holy Cross City. So by 1881, one of the local mines, it was running into some real serious trouble. You see, the ore wasn't producing the way the operators had hoped, right? Money was beginning to tighten, and the mine management, well, they made a decision that lit the fuse. They fired a large group of miners. They just cut them loose, right? So imagine that situation for a minute here, right? You're living in a remote mountain camp, miles from any sort of a real town. Winter breathing down the mountains at you, okay? You've been working underground and you're chasing gold. And suddenly, you're told, hey, your job is gone. Well, a lot of those miners, they didn't take that news quietly. The threats started, right? And they started moving around camp. You had arguments. They would break out in the saloons. And men, well, they started carrying their pistols just a little more openly. And the mine owners, sensing that things were starting to get dangerous, they organized something that was actually pretty common in frontier towns. They organized a vigilance committee. So it was about 40 armed men whose job was essentially just to keep order if things started to get ugly. Now, that might sound like law enforcement, but frontier vigilance committees, they were a very, very strange animal. Sometimes they would protect the towns, and other times they delivered justice just a little too quickly. And, in a tense mining camp where everybody already had a revolver, things could turn ugly real fast. And they did. So one night in December of 1881, the pressure there finally blew. Two men, right, connected to the mine operation, well, they were murdered, just shot dead during the conflict that had, been brewing in the camp. Those killings absolutely shocked what little population remained in Holy Cross City. Now, remember, this wasn't Denver, okay? There was no big police force. There was no forensic team. Just a small, isolated mining town full of armed men and rising anger. So the Vigilance Committee, they stepped in. And when frontier vigilantes stepped in, well, justice, it tended to move quickly, right? So the suspects, they were all rounded up, interrogated, and the camp essentially just became its own courtroom up there in the hills. Now, the accounts of how exactly the investigation unfolded, they vary a bit depending on which historical source that you read. But the important part, it's this, okay? Those murders, they terrified the remaining residents. Holy Cross City was already struggling, economically, and suddenly the town had blood on the snow. So confidence in the district, it just collapsed. Some miners, they just packed up and left. But others, well, they stayed long enough to see if the mines might actually recover. But the truth was really starting to show itself. The gold just wasn't there in the quantities that everybody had hoped. And without rich ore to hold the town together, well, the camp, it slowly began to unravel. The cabins were abandoned, businesses closing, and the miners, they just drifted off to the richer districts around Colorado. And the town that had once buzzed with gold fever, well, it began to fade back into the forest. So today, when you hike into Holy Cross City, okay, you'll find the very quiet remains of that boom town, right? The evidence of the old cabins, some weathered timbers. There's just fragments of the life that once filled that valley. And somewhere in that quiet mountain basin, the echoes of a winter night when a struggling gold camp turned violent. 2 men dead. A town on edge. And the kind of frontier justice that only existed in places where the law was miles away and every man carried a gun. That's the strange thing about Colorado's mining history. For every rich strike, In every famous boomtown, there were literally dozens of places like Holy Cross City, just small camps chasing big dreams, sometimes finding gold, and sometimes finding trouble, and sometimes, well, they found both at the same time. So if you enjoy these little deep dives into Colorado's, forgotten mining camps and the wild stories hiding in the mountains, come on, make sure you subscribe to the channel now. So hit the like button, okay, so that more people who love frontier history and mining history can find the channel. Then you guys just, turn on the notifications. That way you don't miss the next episode with me. And this is important. If you've ever hiked into any of these abandoned mining camps and felt that strange sense that something happened there long ago, drop it in the comments. Because the deeper that you dig into the Rockies, the more stories start just coming out of the ground. All right, y'all. Thanks for hanging. See you on the next one.